last time, I think we got through about 4 of those questions. That's okay. The last half kind of, we covered a lot of those questions anyways, but we'll go over them. But kind of just to recap a bit on covetousness, if you weren't here, we kind of got into what is it, kind of the detriment of it, ultimately what does it boil down to, and kind of defining that. And so going over that again, just a little bit of a definition, kind of remembrance, because we'll talk about contentment and pretty much the opposite of coveting. But there was a few Greek words. He focuses on pleonexia in the book, probably because, I mean, I don't know. It's always used in the negative sense, and when in regards to material possessions or sensuality or whatever it may be that you covet. But when you look at the definition of that, as we pointed out, it's a desire to have more, and that's kind of the literal definition of it. It's just this desire to have more. And there was a few other Greek words. There's really a handful of them, but epithumeo is one, and it's to fix the desire upon. We may be familiar with that term, epi, which is this deep kind of passion. I always think of epignosis, which is this deep knowledge. Epithumeo would be a deep, passionate desire to be fixated on something to the point of coveting, right? Or translating it to that wanting something. And we talked about how it's not necessarily any new issue for us today. Of course, it's in the commandments, thou shalt not covet. But even going back to the beginning in Genesis, we see Eve desired that knowledge, desired that food, that fruit as it was good for food. And that word desire there is also used and translated as covet throughout the Bible as well. And so I found that interesting. And then we also talked about the emotional responses of covetousness and how it invokes feelings of envy, right? This discontentment, this longing for something that someone else has, this arousal for trying to obtain something that may or may not be yours, an ingratitude, dissatisfaction, resentment, bitterness, insecurity, anger, and hostility. All of those things accompany covetousness. All of those things are brought about by covetousness. And so we recognize that there's a clear danger there. It's obviously mentioned as a sin, and we talked about some of those things. I don't think anybody would dispute that, but I think when you talk about really any sin or any problem, you tend to get a little bit theoretical in the fact that you're like, yeah, that's a sin, and I'm not going to do that. But there's no real intentionality behind it of how are we going to not do that? How are we going to accomplish or overcome that? And so kind of wanted to talk about that this morning, and so whatever discussions that we have will be great. Your input will be appreciated. Feel free to make a comment. One thing that I didn't touch on question number, we left off on question number 4 on why does God consider covetous to be idolatry? And I think we covered that, but somebody made the comment, and maybe it was Randy or a few others, about the impact on your household. And so I wanted to touch on that again as kind of a springboard to talk about contentment, which is really the latter half of this lesson. When you think of covetousness, I don't think that, or surely it's not that, I set about my day and I'm like, I'm going to covet this and I'm going to covet that. It just kind of comes about if you're not on guard from it, or if you're not aware of how it might creep into your life. If you think about the household and the family situation, each of us have a role in our house, right? Women, men, all of us have a part to play. And I think what a lot of us can relate to today, because you see this, is this slow desire, this slow build-up to have more, right? It may be, say Kaylee and I together, we desire something, and one way that we might obtain that is right now, she works in the home, and she manages everything there, and she takes care of the kids, and she schools them and all that. But there can be this desire where, we want something. Well, there's an easy way to get that. She can go get a job, and we can get that. And I'm not trying to open a can of worms. I understand that women in the workplace is a thing that happens. I'm talking about when I allow it to creep into my life, and now we're changing some of these things, and we're changing our roles, and it's the only focus is to have more, right? And even if it's not together, say it's me, say there is something I want, and now I start to look for another job, right? I start to see if I can seek out a higher salary or something like that, and it's going to take me away from the house. It's going to take me away from my children. It's going to take me away from the time that I'm supposed to use to dedicate to leading my family, dedicate to edifying everybody else in my life, being a servant. Those are the types of things that I think we see today that slowly creeps in. I'm not sure if I mentioned Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 27 last time, but in chapter 15 and verse 27 it says, "Whoever is greedy for unjust gain troubles his own household." And so I think that's just so fitting because much like any sin, whatever it may be, it has an impact on others, right? It's not just us. We're not ever just the only ones that are impacted. And some of them have a greater earthly impact than others. And covetousness can be one of those. As I work more hours, I become distracted from raising my children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. I might seek a bigger home. Oh, now I got another kid. Now I need a even bigger car, right? And what happens when you're focused on that is, you've probably seen it. What comes along with a bigger house?
Bigger bills.
Bigger bills, bigger chores, more time, right? I wanted a really big yard until I got one, and now I hate mowing, right? And as you acquire these things, as you acquire more items, it just takes more away. And you might even be tempted to, credit is readily available now, whether you can afford it or not. And credit can be a useful tool, don't get me wrong. But it's when we go beyond our means. The bank's willing to loan me more money than I can pay. That pretty much goes with anybody. And so sometimes we get in trouble there. And what happens as those bills come in? What was that?
Yeah, a lot of stress.
Stress, right? Anybody ever argued with their spouse over finances? Probably nobody here, right? So, those types of stresses come into your marriage. I didn't look, but I would assume that one of the major causes of divorce are finances, stress, things like that. I think most of the time it's just irreconcilable differences is what's listed, but it's probably finances. I don't really know, but that's my assumption. But another thing is those of us who have children, you think they see it? Yeah, right. So I was thinking about this because I work in finance, and the beginning of the month is my busiest time. And the latter end of the month, not so much. So I also work at home, and I wasn't so busy the other day. And so my son, who probably thinks I'm working hard, comes in, and I'm looking at waders. I need some waders for a fishing trip, right? And he comes back like an hour later, and I promise I wasn't looking at waders for an hour, but it just so happens when he comes back, I'm still looking at waiters. For all he knows, I'm not even working. I'm looking at stuff that I can acquire, right? When they walk by and we're looking at our phone, right? What are we looking at? A lot of times we're window shopping, right? Ooh, that'd be good. No, I could use that. Well, they see that, right? Well, mom and dad, they want all these things. And so I make that point because I think that is probably, or at least it was for me, the most relatable idea of covetousness. Now, covetousness doesn't just belong to money. I mean, David coveted Bathsheba. It's any desire that we put before God. And that's kind of how we got on this subject, or that's why he goes into the idea of idolatry. And so anyways, wanted to make that example because I think that's, certainly for me, it was something that could be relatable. But before we get into question number 6 on how do we know covetousness can be overcome, did anybody have any comments on that or anything to add to that?
Well, how much of your home life is talking about spiritual things or earthly things, you know? And if all your kids hear is their parents talking about what they don't have or what they want or what they need, and that's a lot of the dinner time conversation, then that's what they're going to become.
Yeah. Have you ever been around? No, I'm not going to do that. Yeah, you're exactly right. It rubs off on your kids, and then they start to talk like that as well. Oh, DJ.
Sorry, I relatively close. Hold on.
Now.
Let me get my thoughts.
No, say it now.
So, when talking about this covetousness thing, and, you were like, I want this lane, I bought it, now I wish I had it, kind of thing. Every time I get, to a place where I think I want something that I don't really need, I think about, what really makes me happy is things that money can't buy, God's provided us so much, these things that bring us satisfaction, being spiritual, but being a husband, being a dad, a good one, those are rewarding forever. When you put your time into those things that God's given you or when you put your time into fulfilling the role God gives you, that is rewarding. And you don't regret that. I think with covetousness, when it's empty. It's an empty pursuit. And, kind of like what you said, every time you get those things you covet, they're not what you drove them up to be.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that last time, that law of diminishing returns, right? You get it, you're satisfied, and then over time you become less satisfied, right? It's kind of this misplaced hope, and we'll talk about that some with contentment also. But, it's putting value into things that there's no spiritual value. How about that? And don't get me wrong, there's, I just have to, sometimes it helps just to count your blessings, right? I hate mowing, but as a mowing, I can listen to different things and count my blessings that I have something to mow, right? So, all right, so, yes, sir.
It's always interesting, when you think about God's wisdom versus our wisdom, and I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to generational, the way we title ourselves, Gen X, and it's really interesting to look at during the boomer generation. A lot of those guys grew up very poor, coming out, a lot of them worked on farms, and there was a lot of things going on. And the generation that they raised saw that and went after wealth. And now it's interesting
I think you're exactly right. We talked about Luke 12 last time about, he stored up all his grains, and now he's got to take this time to tear down a barn and build a new barn. You're talking about this movement of minimalism. I think a couple of years ago, there was that book, The Art of Having Less. Is that what it was called, right? Or something like that. But even the world recognized that there's so much distraction, and when you're able to downsize and you're able to get rid of a lot of things, that less distraction causes less stress. There's more happiness. There's more intentionality behind the things that you have. And one of the ways that I think we start to do is we start to justify a want into a want. Yes, we justify a want into a need, right? I'm pretty good at that. I'll take something that I want, and I'm like, I need this, for this reason. And personally, I was thinking about this the other day. I like watches. And if you want to justify want to a need, be like, well, my kids are going to like that. That's an inheritance. That's something that I can pass down to them. But I imagine my dad or my son would be like, oh, great Timex, Dad, cool, right? Because I don't buy like real nice watches. It's not like it's a Rolex or something. And so it's probably some junk that he doesn't even want. And I seriously doubt anybody ever says, too, I wish I had less time with my parents, right? I don't think, anybody's ever said that. If they grew up with, some decent parents, of course. And that's what we all should be striving to be. But all of these things are just, distractions. And don't get me wrong again. There is nothing wrong with having things and enjoying your blessings. When we're commanded to work hard, a lot of times we are rewarded with that labor, right? We earn a wage. It's when we put that focus and our time on physical things instead of spiritual things. So, talking about covetousness, how do we know? Question number 6. How do we know covetousness can be overcome? And he uses 1 Corinthians chapter 6. How do we know?
The Corinthians overcame it, so if the Corinthians can do it, they're no different than we are today. We can do it.
Yep.
As an example of what we can do, not what we can't.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, yeah, Rich.
I have repentance, grace, and restoration of faith.
Yeah. I mean, you can, insert sin here, right? All of it can be overcome, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be asked to. And covetousness is no different. Now, he mentions it specifically here. If you recall, that church was having a lot of issues, and Paul's talking about here they're bringing lawsuits against one another, and he reminds them that they've overcome all of this by how? In verse 11.
They were washed and sanctified, and they were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. They overcame it through Jesus. And the same for us. We can have confidence in Christ, that we can overcome any temptation. 1 John offers a lot of that confidence. That word is used there frequently, or at least the Greek word that means confidence is throughout that text. Will somebody read 1 John chapter 5 and verse 4?
For whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith.
Yeah, so how can we have confidence in Christ? Did you whisper it? Yes. Huh? Faith. Yeah. Faith, right? Confidence is something that, My son has confidence in everything. But as you get older, I think that, or perhaps, I don't know. I'm not a super confident person. So I think it is a skill sometimes that has to be, practiced. But there is one thing that we can be confident in. Is our salvation, right? Our faith in Christ. And that's exactly the point that John's making. And in this point, he's talking about overcoming worldliness. And a lot of worldliness, we talked about social media last time, is acquiring things, right? Comparing ourselves to each other. It's this life's race, turning life into competitiveness and comparing ourselves to one another. We can overcome that when we realign our priorities. Let's say it that way, right? We're no longer putting our hope in the physical, putting our hope in God. There is a book by a guy that I forgot his name, but he was a Jew who survived Holocaust, right? And one of the things that he talks about is the disparity that was there, and how this one guy had set this time that he was going to be free, right? He came up with this date that he was going to be freed and their war would be over, and that date came and passed, and ultimately he died. And of perhaps disparity, I don't really know. But in that, in the Holocaust, a lot of people would die around holidays, right? They tend to give up because, they lost their focus. They lost their hope. They had a misplaced hope in something rather than God. And not to say that, I don't really want to get into all that. Other than the fact is that we can have confidence in Christ, whether we are enduring something horrible or not. We have to keep our aim on Him. Okay. Any comments on that? Okay.
I want to go back to the word that that was mentioned by Sister Buckley. Is the idea of restoration. Let's not forget about that. Is that when we do find ourselves coveting, we need to be restored. There needs to be then restoration and change that occurs in our life, that we can move forward and be gracious to God for the things that we do have, and with those things, share them with others. And we could go to the woman with the mite and other situations where we see people with very little that we would think of, but really had very much because of their heart and willing to give to others so that God can be glorified. And we need to remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because that's a good lead into the next question. Number 7. What virtue does the Bible offer as a cure? And he uses Hebrews 13, specifically verse 5, answer. Contentment, right? He said contentment. Yeah, contentment. What is content? What is it to be content? What does that word even mean?
Having faith that God is taking care of us instead of, I can take care of myself, but I'll pray to God anyways.
Yeah. It is, even moving our faith aside, it is translated as sufficient, right? It is, I'm satisfied with what I have. What I have is sufficient. And last week, or on Wednesday, we talked about bettering ourselves, right? There's nothing wrong with improving our situation or working on ourselves and bettering ourselves for our family or whatever it may be. It's, again, when we have a discontentment about it. We're not satisfied. we're not counting our blessings. It's just kind of this bitterness about it. Yes, sir.
Two parts. One is, I don't remember who it was a long time ago, in a class like this, talked about having a prayer journal. And then taking the time to go back to that prayer journal, because if we often stop and look, the things we have and all the things going on are answers that we've asked for, but we're not appreciative of them.
Yeah.
But we might have prayed for this situation, and then God blessed us with it. We didn't even realize that it was a blessing from God, and we kind of maybe thought we did it ourselves. But to understand where we're at, and what we have is because of God. And then when we look at this contentment, and then talk about bettering ourselves, do I have the same desire to grow spiritually as I do to grow physically? Do I have the same desire for spiritual treasures as I have for physical treasures? You know, do I look at ways to improve myself spiritually just as much as I look to improve myself, you know, as a dad, as a husband? You know, do I look at that? Do I take the time and go, am I the Christian I need to be? Do I have that desire? And that's when the contentment, all these things come when my focus is right. When I focus on spiritual things, nothing else really matters.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know, maybe it was you, Scott, one time you mentioned, or somebody else, that have you ever just prayed and tried to see how many things you can thank God for, right? See how long you can keep that list going? I tried that. That's tough. Keep trying it. There's a lot of things that we can be thankful for. And what happens is, you know, statistically, or studies show that gratitude, when you're giving gratitude for things, and you know you're happy with the things that you have, and you're acknowledging those things, studies show that you're happier, right? Your quality of life is better. When you complain about things, that has a direct negative effect on your attitude. So in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 5, how did the writer say that we can be content? Who is it through? It's God. Yeah. And he's quoting, he goes on in verse 6 to quote Joshua there, who's about to face a huge challenge and, you know, leading them into that land and the battles that are going to happen there. In verse 6, he says, the Lord is my helper. And so we have to learn to be content and lead on the Lord. And the author also points out what Paul wrote to Philippians in chapter 4 and verse 11. What was Paul's background? How might he, he talks about how he had to learn to be content. How might have Paul learned to be content?
Paul went from being a very notable rich person studying under a famous rabbi in Jerusalem to being, he was traveling around with generally a little more than the cloak on his back and the staff in his hand. He had companions with him, but any money they had was typically going towards other churches. So he went from what would have been almost the height of society back in the day to impoverished and just wandering around.
Yeah, exactly right. Here you have this Pharisee, right, who was well studied, Roman citizen, and gives it up for a greater purpose. He was beaten numerous times. He was in prison. I would think that the majority of us have not experienced that. But here, he knew what his calling was. He was content. Yes, Scott.
And don't make promises on your level of contentment. Dear Lord, all I need is this, and I'll be content for the rest of my life. Well, then you get that. Lori showed me a post or statement on Facebook that somebody had put out there that, of course, they're involved in multi-level marketing or whatever, and it said, and I'm not gonna get it exactly right, but it was like, blessing not gone unnoticed. I don't have to look at price tags anymore. You know, that's a blessing. That they weren't content until they got to that level of, you know. And now I'm causing covetousness in others by stating that. Now others wish they were the same way, and so on. So
And you know,
it's all vain.
maybe it's just me, but maybe a lot of us have experienced that type of situation before. I remember, 20 plus years ago. Wait, how old am I? 20? I was in college at one point somewhere. And anyways, in Lubbock, right? And Brett was the preacher then. And I remember him saying, and I was early on, you know, I hadn't been a Christian for too long, and maybe just gotten to college, I don't know. But I remember thinking, he was giving a lesson on something to this effect, and he was preaching about, you know, don't think that when you set a goal to make this certain amount of money, that you're going to be satisfied, right? And I remember thinking at the time, yeah, we'll see about that, buddy. And, you know, I get out of college and I get my first job, and it's honestly it's really not that much money. And it was kind of what I thought was like that target back in the day. And I got that, and I thought, man, boy, was he right. That's not satisfying at all. And so you start to chase the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And so all that to say, does contentment take practice? Yeah, for sure. Who had it first? DJ?
You know, to his point here, or to what Scott was saying, you know, Paul says he's been full and hungry, and in whatever state he's content. So, you know, there was no level for Paul, and his situation was always, you know, I didn't know the word, going up and down, and he remained content. You know, I think that's a powerful lesson to bring to our mind, because, you know, I'm sure we've been content at a point, but when something changes, your contentment doesn't. You know, like that's what being content is no matter what situation you find yourself in, you are constant, because we have, you know, God, because he goes on to say, I can do all things through Christ. aka I can be content in every situation.
Yeah.
And that's contentment. It's something that is remaining, it's a constant.
Yeah, he also tells the Thessalonians to give thanks in all circumstances also, right? Dara?
Well, I thought, you know, Paul obviously is an excellent example of that, but this book called The Hiding Place, it's about a lady in a concentration camp, really brought into perspective when you're truly spiritually minded. She was, when she prayed, she had been able to sneak a Bible in to her jail, you know, her cell or whatever little place they were holding her. And anyways, and they would never check her cell because they were covered in lice. That particular cell was, so none of the people wanted to go in there to check. And so she was able to keep that Bible. And so when she prayed, and this was a true story, when she prayed, she thanked God for the lice. You know, I was like, that is true contentment and true spiritual mindedness.
Yeah.
You know, and I think we sometimes get confused in this world because we are so blessed that we have to be thankful for something that would be a, you know, like a big house or, you know, whatever. And this lady was thanking God in her situation for the lice so that they weren't checking her.
Yeah. David's going to dispute you.
And the things that I experience going through right now in life and just study, everybody fight to take medication. You know, and I also have a friend who's cleaning out the house of a grandparent. And all these things that, you know, we value, that this grandparent value, they're backing the dumpster up to the house and throwing it away.
Yeah.
And then when fought for and planned for, they don't matter. They just don't matter.
Yeah.
And I think one of the easiest things for me in this lesson and study of covetousness is it doesn't matter. Why would I sacrifice anything for it? Because it really doesn't matter. Why would I sacrifice heaven for that? Why would I sacrifice a relationship with a loved one or anybody for that?
Yeah.
And getting that into perspective. I think that's one of the things that's really helped me is just like, man, just today.
Yeah. What was Leah content with? I mean, that's a rough situation, right? Leah and Rachel, Jacob favors Rachel over her, but ultimately, she was content in her children, right? She was blessed. She was content in the blessings that God gave her, which were those children. So I appreciate all your comments. I didn't quite get through my notes, go figure, but anyways, thank you.